I particularly love the word that you use, which is reinventing yourself. I think that's very true, and it could be the difference between how well you recover. And I don't just mean physically; I mean mentally. Being able to face yourself and look yourself in the mirror and realize that the person that you once was, the one that everyone still identifies you with because you still have the same face, needs to be reinvented. When you go through a life altering event, you are shaking out to the core, and it's only natural for you to kind of shift everything, your values, what you believe in, what you care about, out the window and start rebuilding from scratch.
This is Recovery After Stroke with Bill Gassiamis, helping you go from where you are to where you'd rather be.
Bill from recoveryafterstroke.com. This is episode 102, and my guest today is 10-year stroke survivor Stephanie Ho. Stephanie was in her early 20s when an AVM in her brain bled out. Stephanie has a very lovely way of approaching stroke recovery that I am certain you will get a lot from, and I believe that you will love this episode. Now, when you get to the end of the episode, whether you are watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast app, please do me a favor and share the episode with other groups you hang out in. This will help someone that is going through a tough time at the moment feel better about the journey that they are on, and perhaps give them a sense of that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Also, if you feel that this podcast is a 5-star podcast, because it is, I would love it if you spent a little time giving it a thumbs up on YouTube or a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. You'll be making me smile from ear to ear. Also, recently I've put everything that I learned about what is important in stroke recovery into a course called 10 Steps to Brain Health for Stroke Survivors, and Module 1 is now available at recoveryafterstroke.com. This is a course that is included as part of my Recovery After Stroke coaching program that you get automatically when you become a member of the Recovery After Stroke podcast. Now, this course will help you overcome fatigue, reduce anxiety, and support your memory, amongst other things. This 10-step program has been created to complement any medical interventions and works in conjunction with other physical therapies that you are undergoing. So if you are a stroke survivor that wants to know how to heal your brain, overcome fatigue, and reduce anxiety, this is the course for you. If you feel like there is not enough support after you leave the hospital and you are afraid that your recovery will go backwards, then this is where I can help. While you are participating in this course, I will coach you and help you gain clarity on where you are currently in your recovery journey. I will help you create a picture of where you would like to be in your recovery 12 months from now, and I will coach you to help you overcome what's stopping you from getting there. Now, right now, for anyone who's interested in learning what Recovery After Stroke coaching is about, you get a 7-day free trial to decide if it's the right fit for you. The price, though, will be increasing on July 1 by more than double. So take advantage of the 7-day free trial now by clicking the link below if you're watching on YouTube, or by going to recoveryafterstroke.com/coaching if you are listening online. And now it's on with the show. Stephanie Ho, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I love that we connected a little while ago. We had a really amazing chat offline, probably about a month ago now.
Yeah,
And
we
some
did.
of the things that we spoke about, I felt like we should have had a podcast episode about. And I'm glad we're getting together to do that. Now, just before we get started, can you tell me a little bit about what happened to you?
Sure, and thank you for having me again, Bill. So where did it all start? My stroke happened actually 10 years ago. Um, I was fairly young. I was still 22. I had just finished uni, started work, was feeling pretty ready to take on the world. And after a few months of full-time work, one day I just woke up feeling actually fine. I remember hearing my phone ring, and I got up, and I checked a message, and I remember thinking I must be so out of it, or maybe I had too many drinks the night before, because I couldn't decipher the words or the letters in that message. Um, and yeah, lo and behold, I think was happening is my hemorrhage, my stroke was at this time already bleeding out. So my stroke was in the Broca's area, in the language center of my brain, and then yeah, I remember going to the bathroom next, and luckily my mum was there, and she asked me how was my night before, and at this point, this is when I freaked out, because he, what I came out to reply her with was like just jumble, like this blah blah of I don't know, a sound, and I freaked out. I ran, or I walked downstairs, and my brother, he luckily was still at home, and he opened the door, and I'm just trying to muster some words, which is not working out. And he actually thinks I'm still drunk. At this point, I should definitely mention that my brother is a very, very intelligent guy, very, very smart, and goes to show that, even he didn't really know what was going on. Maybe a mark of lack of public awareness or education on strokes. But I typed "can't wait," so I knew what something was wrong, but because there's no brain pain receptors in the brain, I couldn't feel the pain. Um, so I typed "can't wait," and he's like, "Can't wait for what?" And that at this point, my right hand side collapsed, and then he got very worried. He googled a few things, and then stroke came up, and then yeah, hence began the long journey from Sutherland Hospital, where I got I guess assessed, moved to Prince of Wales. I stayed there for 3 months. Oh no, I lie. A month before my surgery, before then going into inpatient for rehab. Um, my stroke was actually quite severe, which I learnt much later. It was a kind of like a golf ball size hole in my head, and that rendered me unable to speak at all. I couldn't read, write, or I could still understand. So that was a huge blessing in disguise. Um, I walk or talk, or use my right arm. I was partially blind for a while, and luckily that came back. But yeah, I often like talk about this part, and it's almost surreal. It's almost like I'm giving a synopsis of a movie, because I don't remember much of it. Um, I certainly wasn't in a space that I could feel worried or concerned. I was just so spaced out. So I often bring back attention to the recovery, which I think is more important, at least for the person going through the stroke or the recovery process, because that's when your mind kind of like comes back online, and that's
Mm.
when you really do need the support,
Yeah,
physically, mentally, spiritually, all that. Um,
I love
yeah,
that.
so
I love what you said there because I was the same. I was pretty spaced out, and
mm,
I love the similarity. Well, I don't love the similarity, but there's a similarity there. Mine was a golf ball sized clot in my head as well, and it was there for a long time because I didn't have surgery for quite a number of years, and it started to
oh,
decrease in size. And as it decreased in size, more and more of the things that I'd lost came back on,
right.
and I was able to talk again, write an email again, drive again, work again, and
Oh, amazing.
it took some time, but I did the same thing. Reflecting back on it, it was somebody else's story that I was telling. I wasn't really telling my own story because I was out of it and I was spaced out and I didn't have a concern in the world. There was no worry. everyone else around me was freaking out and losing their minds,
Yeah.
but I was kind of chill. And now that you're 10 years down the track, do you find it? Is there any drama talking about it? Any sort of issue? Do you have any? Does it bring up anything?
Um, Not really, is maybe the short answer. I'm certainly still very passionate about, um, what's happened. You know, it's been 10 years, but I don't think there's been one day that I don't, uh, think remotely about that. Not necessarily about the day itself, but rather the whole saga, you know? Um, that one fateful day uh, determined, you know, my the rest of my life. Really, it's changed me as a person.
Mm.
It's changed how I work, what I prioritize, what I plan for, just everything. So it's not painful. It's not it doesn't bring up certain negative feelings, but yeah, it's still a very big part of my life every day, and I think also people, my loved ones around me as well.
Yeah, and that's because you have some deficits. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So, um, I had a pretty good night's sleep, so hopefully I'm able to speak fairly clearly today. But when I'm tired, I slur my words. Like just my brain's not quite connecting as well, which is frustrating. If I'm tired, I also can't spell so well. I never was very good spelling, but um, and then I had like spasticity in certain areas of my right uh, hand, my legs as well. When I'm cold, in particular, the circulation doesn't run as well, and then things kind of seize up. Like I often joke to my family about my right hand side, especially my hand, is almost like a sea creature, likes to like just close up when it senses like danger or something that it doesn't quite like. So that's the I don't know the primal side of the evolution maybe. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, yeah.
So I like what you're saying there. My left side, and again, you wouldn't see me, and people wouldn't know that I had a stroke unless they knew about my podcast and heard me speak. But my deficits are not visible, but there is
Mm,
proprioception issues. There's numbness. There's temperature issues, and when I get tired, my left side gets wonky and my balance is a little bit off. But
yeah.
I relate to what you're saying, and I reckon there'd be many people listening that relate to what you just said about how your hand kind of has a mind of its own. It does its own thing to protect itself, to not get
Absolutely.
knocked or touched. I really don't like my hand being touched by anybody,
Yeah.
especially when they do it gently.
Oh, is
When
it overstimulating? Is that why you don't like it?
Yeah, when they do it rough and they don't
Oh,
take care, it's no problem. But when
yeah,
they try and be gentle, like my wife tries to be gentle,
yeah.
that really that really drives my senses nuts.
Yeah, right.
I might act up, and she's trying to be nice and friendly and
Gentle.
loving, and I'm being a bit nasty. But it's not me. It's that hand. That hand makes me do that.
Yeah, actually, I know exactly what you mean. It's almost like this, because it's so gentle and, you kind of, your brain has enough time to receive all the messages from the tiny hairs in your arm or wherever. Um, it's almost more distressing.
Yes.
So yeah, when I go to the dentist, for example, when he's drilling on my right hand side, it doesn't hurt at all. Whereas like tickles, I just that is torture to me.
Yeah, right. It's like that anticipation of being tickled. When people are going to get tickled, you're going to go tickle somebody, and then they get all this strange feeling. They start laughing and they start freaking out, and they haven't even been tickled yet. And then you tickle them, and it gets worse. It's kind of like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's a really weird thing. It really is. We don't really know how the brain truly works. and the the things you take for granted, like pain and pressure, things like that, it really does all go out the window, and is all very unique to everyone. So yeah, like another weird thing after the stroke, when I now sneeze every like 3 times. Every time I sneeze, it's like 3 times, and something happens when I scratch on my nose, and my thumb comes out the way that I've been trying to, to practice in OT exercises for years. So it's really weird.
Yeah.
Weird, yeah. I don't know.
Seems like there's been a bit of a muddled up reconnection somewhere, and
Oh,
things are
yeah.
firing and triggering in different ways.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Like to think that there's literally a void space in my brain, the size of a golf ball, and the fact that I'm able to talk to you, have this conversation is a miracle in itself.
Yeah.
Because they tell me that there's no language center anymore. So whatever way that my brain managed to hodgepodge these like connections, I'm still very thankful because it still works, or albeit maybe not perfectly, but
Yeah.
I'm okay with sneezing 3 times now.
Yeah, of course. Um, except when you sneeze during Corona virus, does it people freak out? Oh my God, she's sneezing.
Oh, that's a whole other thing. Yes, yes. Corona. Oh, can you believe we've found ourselves in this time? It's helpful that we're able to have this conversation across borders because I'm in Sydney and you're in Melbourne, right?
Yeah.
But you know what? I was actually just contemplating certain things about this, widespread pandemic, which now has made it, all these issues are a collective one. Everyone's going through the same thing roughly. Um, and I can't help but draw the parallels between, people talk about anxiety and depression and trying to deal with uncertainty. These are all things that stroke survivors have to go through, and in isolation there is no other pool of people where you can just say, hey, I'm feeling or going through this, and how about you, and having that camaraderie or support is just really hard, because at least for me, and I know that this goes for a lot of other people, when you go through a stroke, most people thinking about the more obvious physical signs, which is they're not able to walk or talk or do usual activities, but really it's the sense of self that you lose, and that of course makes you feel very isolated. Um, so yeah, when you're literally stuck at home because you can't do anything else, because you have really real severe chronic fatigue issues, where going out, getting out of bed and brushing your teeth and having a shower is enough to you're like spent for the whole day. Um, I think it's just funny because I'm like, you know what? I know that there's a whole pool of people who, yes, it's hard, but can really deal with this because I think we've all gone through that before.
I agree with you. I was asked very early on when isolation started how I'm coping or what was happening for me. And I was like, well, I've been here before. I don't really have an issue with isolation per se. I'm not working again, and I know what that's like.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not out and about again. I know what that's like. Limited amount of times where I can do stuff, and for short amounts of time, and
Mm,
all that stuff was really familiar. But where I noticed a slight difference in some other stroke survivors, I'm coaching somebody who is going through stroke recovery now.
mm,
So they don't, and they are very early on in their stroke recovery,
Yeah.
and they don't have that distance like you and I have, where I have 8 years post stroke. Reflecting on that is an interesting reflection, and you have 10 years and you're seeing the similarities and it's kind of familiar. But she's going through isolation from both stroke and coronavirus.
Oh, wow.
So it's
Yeah.
kind of made it worse because she was really keen to get out and about and get
Right.
rehab, and that
Yeah.
put an end to rehab. So when I was reflecting on my experience, that's kind of what I noticed. That's the main difference, is that some stroke survivors are going through isolation times two, so to speak,
Oh,
and we are going through that second phase of isolation at a distance, reflecting back on it and seeing that it's familiar and we're okay with it and we know that it will pass and things will get better. But people who are right in it now, they
mm.
haven't experienced that yet and they can't
Oh,
reflect on
absolutely.
it will pass.
What a what a traumatic point to imagine because, oh my goodness, did I'm just thinking about during this period, during my initial acute period of recovery, it was all about just trying to like squeeze out every single bit of flicker of movement or any recovery I could get. And to think that she has another huge hurdle to consider, like let alone stroke is bad enough in itself, but not being able to access the appropriate services. And it's all about, they talk about the golden windows of like 3 months to a year to etc. Not to say that I truly believe in that. I think people continue to recover as much as they put out. But there is truth in that first initial window. And yeah, I wish the best of luck to her because that must be so hard.
Yeah, what's good about it is that she's getting better and things have started to ease. So she's got back to rehabilitation, which is really was really exciting for her. And the other issue was that it minimized the amount of carers that were coming to her home. She was somebody who was
Um,
living on her own. So the carers that were coming in and helping her, they had to minimize all of that sort of stuff. So then she's starting
mm,
to get back on board. She's starting to get into rehab again. It's starting to lift her spirits. So she's starting to feel better. But
yeah.
but of course, there's the roller coaster ride of emotions, all those things that stroke survivors go through um, that we know about, our community knows about, but people outside of stroke don't know about. And I think it just made matters worse for her. And what was really good was that at that time, she was really smart to reach out and get help somewhere. So,
Um,
so she reached out to me. We began a coaching conversation, and that really made a difference. It got her out of some of those really difficult times where she needed to express herself and get stuff off her chest and vent and do all those things, and she was able to do that. And then we're able to have this conversation backwards and forwards, even through email or just messenger or something like that, just to just to spark a conversation that's about something other than focusing on what the problems are.
yeah.
So stroke survivors that are listening would benefit really well by reaching out to somebody, whoever it is, and
Oh,
just going
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
just saying, hey, let's have a chat, or can we have a chat, or whatever.
And I'm so glad that she did. But the thing is, I I feel for her for many reasons, but one of which is she's not a part of this. Well, what happens is, most people when they are beginning the path of recovery, they go into the gym and they see other people maybe similar, maybe dissimilar, but at least you have a bit of a gauge of what other people are going through. It's I mentioned before it's isolating itself, but to do it, sure you have clinicians and allied health people coming in, but you don't really know how you're going. And I guess,
Yeah, you're missing a
oh,
lot of information and feedback from people, and continuity in your recovery. It's sort of all over the place. And I felt really good about knowing that I had continuity of my recovery. So I started a certain day. This is the plan. These are all the things that we're going to do, and that's going to continue for a certain amount of time. And that began for her. Everything was going great, and then it stopped. So it did interfere with the continuity and the way that she felt about knowing
Yeah.
how she was going. Because, like, all right,
Mm.
am I going to get worse? What do I do now?
Yeah, of course, of course. And also just having a benchmark, I had a lot of people around me who had knee and hip replacements, and I'm the single, stroke patient who's
Yeah,
young, so that kind of puts me out as an outlier, which is I don't think is true, but yeah, it's there's so much value in being able to befriend someone and being able to just ask questions and know that, oh wow, that's normal, so that kind of puts my heart at ease and I can move on to the next stage. Or yeah, I think you being able to help her through that, it's going to be invaluable.
it is. It is invaluable. That's what I was seeking when I was going through that, and I didn't have enough people to connect with either, because the things on the internet weren't so happening yet. There were
Yeah,
stroke survivor communities that I was getting involved in. I was 37, and those people that I was getting involved with, lovely people, there's no issues there, but they were in their late 60s and that, and it was just something that I couldn't really relate to. Of course, we related to the stroke recovery side of it, but we
yeah.
didn't relate to anything else. So it didn't really create a great connection for me. But I
Mhm.
did make one amazing friend who was another stroke survivor, who I bumped into because uh, it was just before my surgery. And somehow I bumped into him and we got in touch. And I asked him if I could speak with him before my surgery, just because he was 10 years post stroke then. And he was what I needed to see going into surgery. I
Yeah,
needed to see an example of what's possible.
absolutely.
And
Yeah,
then,
absolutely.
and then Andrew became one of my best mates, and he became somebody that really made a massive difference to me and inspired me to want to do the most I could do to get better. Um, and I was lucky like that. But very early on, that isolation, that being at home on my own, not having anyone to relate to, was a big issue. I was 37. Like, what's that like for a 22-year-old?
Yeah, I you talking about it just reminds me of how crazy it is to navigate every single part of your life, and I really mean every single part, because you know people think about work or relationships and friendships. I'm talking about, well, I can't get out of bed without help with my parents. I need to mediate between what kind of clothes I want to wear, because I can't express myself because I can't talk anymore. Um, I don't. It's very unfair to compare, because I think it's just everyone's too unique. Their strokes and their personalities, but as a young stroke survivor, there's the added layer of just misconception or just lack of knowledge. I think, for example, if I can draw parallels between cancer and stroke, there's a lot of public awareness of what cancer is. Cancer is a thing that affects a lot of people. There's multiple types of cancer. People know this, but you hear stroke and you think, okay, I know it's a bad thing. I think it's like a grandma, a grandpa, older disease, but people don't even know what the signs of a stroke are, let alone what the recovery process would be. So I think it's just crazy to think that once the doctors are so great at keeping us alive, and then they give us some rehab for a few months, and they just bid you farewell, and best of luck to you. And I'm not just, I'm trivializing it a bit, but essentially, I think in one way or another, you one day find yourself at home sitting there and just thinking, what next? I'm just freaking out. And people, they're very kind and very lovely to say things like, "Well, you must be very, very brave," or you know, very inspirational to get through all this. But to to be completely honest, what is more truthful is I was so desperate. I was just so desperate to get as much as I could back. I remember telling myself one day to put my feelings aside, like all my emotions one day aside, because I just knew that this is the golden period for me to just give everything I had. And then I'll allow myself to wallow and cry at the end, just in case like it doesn't work out. But yeah, I was just like almost staring it down the barrel of a gun and just going for it because that was my time. And then on top of that though, so you had this like make or break mission of life, and then I have lovely friends, of course, trying to be as supportive as they could, and it was a whole mess of just me not caring about all this other stuff that we used to care about, like fashion or like going out to parties and things like that. Like I had a job to do, and then yeah, on top of that was the lack of communication, expression, just physically not being able to go to parties, knowing that I couldn't go to the beach because my balance was off balance. I couldn't trust myself. I remember like going away once, and I it's my fault, but I kind of went out into the ocean, and I everyone else was out there, and I just thought, you know what, I'm gonna see how I go. And of course I stumbled, I got myself a bit cut with the oysters, and yeah, I just knew that I had a new benchmark of things that I could achieve, and that was okay because I now knew that there's a new goals for myself.
Yeah,
Mm.
I remember you reminded me of a couple of things that happened to me going back into the beach and into water. Um, and again, I mean, I even had my own misconceptions about stroke recovery. Even when I was 2 or 3 or 4 years down the track, I thought everything just
Right.
goes is going to go back to normal, you know. And it's like
Yeah.
I've gone into the water. I remember at the beach this one time, and I couldn't stand up because there was some waves coming through, and they were just knocking me over. And it was like, far out, man. This is so difficult. Trying to walk into the sand is so difficult because
Yeah.
the 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 waves are making me visually lose my balance as well as actually and physically lose my balance. So that was
Mm.
really strange to experience that. And then the other thing that was happening is the sand and the little shells and all those things that normally don't bother my other leg are
Ah,
really hurting my
yeah,
left leg. And I'm
yeah,
going, wow, this is way too painful. I've got to really get in really quickly and
yeah.
start floating because it hurts. And I don't have another way to get into the water. I'm going to have to suck it up a little bit and get, and experience some pain, right? So that was
Wow.
interesting. And now when I go to the beach, I wear, beach shoes or whatever they call them,
Yeah.
just rubber soles that I
Mm.
can actually walk into the water with. Otherwise, it's no fun. I
So that
don't.
was the first time you went back to the beach?
Yeah. That was
Wow.
the first time back, and it was just something that I never expected, and it reminds
Yeah.
me of a time when I did it when I danced again for the first time with my wife. We went to this ball and we just did this little dance, and I was way out of my comfort zone. I couldn't talk about two left feet. Oh my gosh, like it was terrible, you
Like,
know.
good for you for dancing in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, I tried, and then it was like, wow, no, no, I can't do this. I'm not going to do this because I'm going to fall over. And
Right.
I don't want to be embarrassed when I fall, but I don't want to hurt myself and hit my head, and that's what made it really concerning.
Were you quite the dancer beforehand?
No, not really. I wouldn't call myself a dancer at all. But you're just one of those things that men do. They hold their wife and they just do this thing and they look like they're dancing. That's what I used to do.
Like rock and sway.
Yeah, yeah, just one of these things.
Yeah, right.
But those two experiences, now that you've reminded me, were almost traumatic to go and do again, but fun
Mm,
once I got past all the trauma. But they were a
mm.
little bit scary. And then I remember we went out to this amazing waterfall just near where we live, a couple of hours drive away. And it's a waterfall, and of course at the bottom of the waterfall there's a big lake, and people go there and they climb down all these stairs and they get to the bottom of this waterfall, and then they just swim in the lagoon, and it's amazing, it's
Oh,
beautiful.
nice.
But the difference is it's fresh water, and in
Okay.
fresh water you don't float like you do in
Oh,
salt
yeah.
water.
Mm.
Of course I didn't know that. So I decided it's nice and flat and perfectly for swimming, and I was going to swim from the shore to underneath the waterfall. I was about halfway
Oh,
in, and I became extremely fatigued
yeah.
immediately, and I couldn't swim. And I
Oh
thought
my
I was
God.
going to go under, and I thought I was going to drown. So I
What
was
happened?
I was with people, and I grabbed onto the person who was next to me just to get my
Um,
breath, and I told them to help me get back out.
all right. Oh, good. Oh,
But it
good.
was that whole misconception, my own misconceptions about what recovery was. And imagine somebody who's never had a stroke, like
Yeah.
how the misconceptions are just through the roof. They've got no idea what,
Mm. Yeah, I actually think it's I would actually be more surprised if a person had a conception for me to prove wrong.
yeah,
I actually think stroke is so ill, like understood that people wouldn't where know where to start. Um, I often get really cranky when I hear or see like even in TV shows, American TV shows, they'll often use stroke as the butt of the joke of like, oh, are you having a stroke, or are you talking something wrong, or they'll it doesn't add to to the public awareness at all. But I think it's really hard because once you get to a point where you recover well enough to essentially reinsert yourself into normal society, um, then there's no rule book. There's literally everything you used to do, and then you just have to kind of like I say, don't think about it too much and see how far you go. Make sure you have someone around you. But it is incredible to kind of go through the same thing you used to do day in day out, almost like muscle memory, and then for you to experience it all again for the first time.
yeah,
Um, and I think it's both really daunting and really scary, but it can be very rewarding and invigorating if you give yourself that chance. I think there's a lot of people who that this is a whole other topic, but of self identity where you know most people as, as, assume that they're a certain person where they derive value in what they do,
yeah,
their friends, the cars they drive, all these superfluous external factors. And then when you find yourself in a hospital bed, like able to talk or walk or even use your phone, you start becoming very keenly aware of the person you are.
yeah,
And I think it's very daunting when you go back out into that world and you have to rediscover you and that world and how that intermingles and whether that works still. Um, and
yeah.
that can be very hard to swallow when you realize that you can't really quite do the same things you used to do.
And you're discovering that while you're recovering from stroke. So it's not an easy thing to reinvent yourself, rediscover
Yeah.
yourself, and then have to recover from stroke, overcome fatigue, all that kind of jazz. And it's like, I mean, talk about needing to really dig deep and understand yourself and discover who you are. And I think that's a really great point that you made there is it's also difficult for people who discover what they are after a stroke because sometimes they might discover that they don't like who they are. And who they are is, and I'm speaking from experience, who they are is somebody who's just stupidly focusing on work, 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 money, 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 all this stuff. And then when I don't have any of that stuff, it's like, all right, what the hell else do I have? Like, who am I? What do I do with my life other than work? Who do I
Yeah,
connect with and talk to other than people who I go to work with?
yeah,
How
that's right.
boring is my life? Like, that's kind of how I was thinking. And then I just went on a journey to find people that were amazing people to be with and had nothing to do with work or all the other stuff that I used to do, cars, going out, any of that stuff. They
Yeah,
only had to do with stuff that was related to actually helping me grow and have an example of how to be a work guy, but also layer in some other amazing things that I could be, not just
yeah,
a work guy. I could
yeah,
be
that's right.
a caring person. I could be a volunteer, which I am.
Mm,
I could be a podcaster, which I am. And all these things started to come into my reality, as in, you don't have to just be the guy that goes to work and does that and nothing else. And then when that's
yeah,
gone, you're nobody.
yeah, that's right, that's right. And it's
If you've had a stroke and are in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind, like, how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain things, but obviously because you've never had a stroke before, you probably don't know what questions to ask. If this is you, you may be missing out on doing things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These 7 questions are the ones Bill wished he'd asked when he was recovering from a stroke. They'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free.
it's really interesting how you say that. I particularly love the word that you use, which is reinventing yourself,
Mm.
because I think that's very true, and it could be the difference between how well you recover. And I don't just mean physically; I mean mentally. Being able to face yourself and look yourself in the mirror and realize that the person that you once was, the one that everyone still identifies you with because you still have the same face, needs to be reinvented. And I think, not to be too corny, but it is true. When you go through a life altering event, you are shaking out to the core, and it's only natural for you to kind of shift everything, your values, what you believe in, what you care about, out the window and start rebuilding from scratch. Um, I think it's a blessing and could be a curse, depending on how much you're able to accept what's happened. And
Yeah.
I know that it's all very different from other people because, for example, I had my stroke from an AVM, so arteriovenous malformation, which I was born with. So it wasn't lifestyle driven. It wasn't my fault per se. It was no one's fault either. It's a random tangle of veins which one day ruptured, and from that point, I think I was able to draw a line in the sand and realize, oh, that's why, that's happened, and I can progress past that. But even before you asked me whether talking about this, it conjures up any feelings or not. I think that helps, going through that grieving process, grieving the past self of the person you once were. Um, Whereas some people, yeah, it's not as easy, and I think, yeah, I could be the deciding factor. It's very true.
Yeah, and I think mindset comes into it. And I know people talk about mindset a lot, but there's, you know, the work from Carol Dweck. She talks about the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. And if you're going through stroke, and I'm talking to people who are listening and watching now, if you're going through stroke and you don't like who you are after stroke, as in you're thinking back and you're going, I did this and I did that, and that's all I ever did, and now I can't do that. So who the heck am I?
Yeah.
If you're gonna try and get back to who you were, you're going back to the person you were before you had a stroke.
That's a good point, and we know how that ended up.
Yeah, right. You don't maybe don't want to go there exactly, you know. And if you remain fixed in that previous mindset, you're going to struggle and you're going to suffer um,
Yeah,
the pain that it takes to go back to something that you can't get back. Once you
yeah,
step in a river and then you step out of that river, if you step back in that river again, that river has changed. It may be in the
mm,
same place and look the same, but you've done something and you disturbed the rocks in that river and they've gone elsewhere. And slowly the banks are eroding and the river is widening or shortening in some places or becoming more narrow. That's how we are. When things happen and we change, that change has occurred, and now we have to find a way to evolve with the changes that are occurring. And that's where the
absolutely,
growth
yes.
mindset comes into it. And what does a growth mindset mean? I'm not going to give you a definition, but from my perspective, it's just being able to accept that things are going to change, allow
Mm,
them to change, and see what I gain from that change. If
mm,
I gain something, even if it's knowledge that I'm shit at change, that's
mm.
still good because I
Yeah,
learned
exactly.
that at the moment I'm not good at change, and soon, if I allow more change to occur, I might get better at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a real internal invisible war against yourself. I think our brains are of course hardwired to be quite effective in being lazy. That's why we have motor muscle memory. But when you are like completely just hit hard and nothing else is what we used to know or believe, um, you kind of are forced to survive by going with the change. Otherwise, yeah, to me, the the opposite is not even an option, because I wanted to be happy, I wanted to be fulfilled, maybe in a different version of what I used to imagine myself to be living. But as cheesy as it can be, I am happier, more content, and at peace with myself, but only through having gone through the hard work of yeah, grieving. The whole 5 stages of grieving is a real thing, like the the denial, the anger, all that. Um, and it certainly wasn't easy. And I think um, I don't know why we don't in the hospital kind of are given that option to talk to a counselor or a psych. I never got offered that chance until much later, 8 years on, and just said, I just feel like I should maybe just chat to someone to make sure that I'm dealing with things, and whether I've not forgotten something. And then I think what really frightens me is, so far I've had a fairly good journey. But one day I would hate to think that I would have this thought, and then I would break down. in this puddle because I just had this huge blind side, which I never thought about. So yeah, I think it's just can be very difficult that way.
I love what you said there about counseling. I mean, I went to counseling 7 days after the first bleed in my brain, just
Okay.
because I was already seeing a counselor. And she's a smart lady. So I thought, oh my gosh, like I need to go and tell her about what's happened to me so that we
Yeah.
can talk about it and blah, blah, blah. And and that was really good. But you're right, not one time, not one person came and said to me, like, how are you dealing with what
Mm,
you've just woken up from? And not in the sense of like what's your body doing, because they focus on your body. It's like, what about your emotional well-being and your mental well-being?
yeah,
Stroke survivors are crying at the drop of a hat all the time,
yeah.
and not one person says maybe part of the stroke recovery journey needs to include counseling.
It's just baffling to me because yes, we have between you and I, we have 18 years of lived experience, but I think it is baffling because it's so ironic. We're talking about the brain, where every decision, every muscle movement, it all starts from one big mass of an organ. And I'm so passionate about this particular point, and I kind of like harp on and on about this in different rehab and stroke boards because I think people forget that again, you might be very good at saving my life, but what kind of life are you letting me live if I'm not fully okay to still own my life? And I mean that by when you're when you wake up, people give you meals, they tell you when to shower, they tell you when to exercise, and then you just get dropped um, back home thinking, yeah, off you go. And I don't I don't think it's very fair or reasonable to expect that a person will just pick up where you left off, and for me to be completely autonomous or feel empowered enough to have been educated, and that's a whole other thing, to keep going. Neurological conditions are very like literally the hardest thing to really get better. It's often lifetime kind of maintenance thing, and you just expect me to know what I'm doing. Whereas, when I do my sit to stands 30 times every day, you've not explained to me why I'm doing them or what kind of muscles you're trying to ask me to activate. It's just it's a missed opportunity, and luckily between I guess when we had our strokes, good 10, 8 years ago, now it's a lot better. I'm so pleased and relieved to know that there's now a shift to a patient-centered care, and they are now beginning to realize that the patient can actually be an asset, let alone, but also the 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 subject matter expert themselves. So just please do ask them, or ask them what goals they want, because you'd be surprised. Even though we might be stripped of our work attire, um, we have years behind us. We do have our own brains and knowledge. Please use that asset as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did get asked by two people what I wanted to achieve in rehab. And imagine how many people I saw. Like we always see heaps and heaps of people at the beginning. But there was only two people that ever asked me what I wanted to achieve. And one was in outpatient rehab. And that was when I wanted to get to the point of running, and not running a marathon, but just running off the road, for example, that
Yeah,
kind of running.
safety.
Yeah, safety running. And that person asked me, what would you like to achieve? And I said that, and that's what we worked on. So that was really amazing. And then another person asked me, what would I feel comfortable doing? What kind of exercises? And because I was at a facility that had a swimming pool, when I was learning how to walk again, I
Mm,
asked them to let me use the swimming pool to walk. And that was amazing because I felt
mm,
safe. It was warm. I was. It wasn't heavy. I was being. I was kind of floating, and I was just feel. I felt completely safe, and those two things made such a massive difference. That that I had
mhm.
a choice, and B, that they will then actually they had the insight to ask me. Whereas before that, the whole process where they evaluated me included only this is what we're going to do. These are the exercises that we're going to do.
Yeah,
And it came a lot later when they asked me what I wanted to do. So
yeah,
it meant so much to me to be able to give them my version of what I wanted to do. And
um,
of course, then I was more motivated. I was happier to be there. I was going to, by default, create more neuroplasticity and get better results just because I was motivated and
of
I wanted to.
course, of course. I to think that, it's been so long ago, but those two examples still spark that a sparkle in your eye.
Mm,
Just but can you imagine if they did that throughout your recovery? Can you imagine how much better and how much or less stress or heartache you could have saved? I'm always I'm always saying that you might be exercising a foot or an arm, and that's a physical result. But what we're really exercising is the brain. It's not like a broken bone where if I just left it, it would just heal by itself. It is the most cruel and and boring thing you will ever go through. Doing 50, 100 mundane exercises, but that's therein lies that what I call the nugget of gold, where you really need to kind of I often use the example of rehab needs to be as difficult as almost like a hard math problem. If you're doing a if you're doing an exercise that it's really challenging and it's just making your brain scrambled because it's so hard, you are literally shooting those synapse fires between your brain and the part of the brain, the body you're trying to move. And I hope, I wish a therapist had told me this much, much earlier, because until I realized the difference, it's not like I'm going to the gym to be like a meathead gym junkie. I'm actually trying to do a really hard mouth problem with like with my body. Um, so having that education, I think, is key. Having that, bringing that person along the ride of their recovery, explaining why things are happening, why they are, and how we should be doing them, brings up that motivation that you mentioned, but also the empowerment and autonomy that comes along with that. So when push it, put them out to the real world, they'll feel confident enough to continue on with that, and then using those principles of goals and also what we're trying to achieve, we're smart, so we'll be able to slightly fine tune in different aspects or activities. I ulti- ultimately rehab is really about being able to function in day to day life, and I try to do that with everything I do. When I went back to work, that was the ultimate speech therapy, really, in every way. So yeah, I wish we had more autonomy, and less kind of wrapped up in cotton wool.
I remember you said some things there that triggered my memory again, and I remember when I was playing soccer as a 27-year-old or something like that. You would get ready for the game, first game of the year, and you would do a whole bunch of training, and then you would go and play the game, and you would realize no matter how much training I do, I'm not game fit. I am
Mm,
still not able to sustain myself for a whole entire game.
totally understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And isn't that's what stroke recovery is like? Because I did probably 4 years of rehab, recovery, all those things. And after surgery, I was probably out of action maybe for about another 2 years. So maybe 5 years where I was doing a whole bunch of stuff that was related to me recovering and healing, where I was focused on it a lot. And
Yeah.
then I went to work in an office behind a computer for the first time after 5 years. Oh
Wow.
my Lord.
Wow. Yeah. I
It was
can
like,
imagine.
oh my God, no match fitness. I could not get through 3 minutes of sitting behind that screen, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then slowly, slowly, that ramped up over 3 years. It ramped up to where I was more capable, but still not fully comfortable with being behind a computer
Yeah.
for many, many hours without breaks and all that kind of thing. I was always up and about. So that's what that reminds me of. That match fitness doesn't come from just going to rehabilitation, because it doesn't create real world situations, does it?
Yeah, I love that analogy, particularly maybe because I'm also a football supporter. Maybe I don't want to know who you support. We'll talk about that later. But I think the brain it's so effective that the term or the saying use it or lose it is really really well in effect. But the thing is, when we do rehab exercises in the hospital or at home, those are very controlled environments. You are not distracted. You're not I guess stressed because you know that you're not being watched by another person. Um, Once you're out there, there's only so much prep we can do before match day. But that's the point. Like put a date and then go out there and just see how you go. Make sure you have those safety nets of a person you can call at any time. Or um, for me, it's always like a bottle of water and a bit of sugar, because that all brain loves the carbs. Um, so I have that fix. But I think when I went back to work, which is 2 years after, I didn't really know what had happened to me. All I knew was it was really bad. And I couldn't waste one more moment to just not try and get better. So I just worked and worked and worked. Um, I literally used, my rehab became a new 9 to 5 job. I had 7 doctors, every day I had 7 hours of something. Um,
Wow.
yeah, I had 3 boxes to tick every day, and that was PT, OT, and speech. I just make sure that I was just covering all my ground. But then on the day that I got back to work, which is 2 years on, it was just so it's almost comical, because I like gear myself up so much. And then at the time I was still living with my parents, and they live in back in the Shire, into the city on the train. That's like a 45 minutes at the time. No express services at the time. So that's two hours just traveling. And then I think I started off with just 2 hours for the first day of going back. And I was just wrecked. I've never been so wrecked, because your brain like first first of all, you're in this unknown environment, you're completely buzzed, you're fully engaged, you feel like everything is attacking you in a weird way because it's all so very new. So your concentration is to maximum 100%, just ready to fight or flight just in case. And then, of course, when you go back to work, I work for a financial services company. At the time, I was in consulting, and there's a lot of young new people. So, 2 years on, of course, half of the floor I didn't really know, and also meant people didn't know me or what's happened to me. So everything was a challenge. Everything was really, really hard. And I think not until you kind of do as much as you can in terms of prepping, and then you go out and just test it. Yeah, it's going to be very really exhausting. It's going to be really daunting. But the good news is, the more we do it, the easier it gets. It's just like anything else, practice does make it so much easier. I went from working 3 days a week, 2 hours a day, to increasing that to 3 hours, 4 hours, and then so on and so forth. And I'm so relieved to say that that's happened, because fatigue is just another thing to can either make or break, whether you can or not increase those hours. But I hesitate to actually share this part, but I'll just say it anyway because it's worked for me. So there's a caveat. But I remember thinking, if the brain is the muscle, which it is, I'm gonna, you know, I'm gonna test myself and push myself a little more each day. So there's this moment where you feel completely just, you are a zombie, you are legless, it's like you've had 10 beers kind of thing. You're just really out of it. And I just remember, you know what, I'm going to work for an extra 10 minutes and see how I go. And I kind of applied that every day. And like sometimes you have this like fuzzy headache where your body is telling you you need to shut down. I went through that, and then yeah, somehow it kind of just got better and easier. Sure, everything else was getting easier as well. So maybe I was refocusing that energy to those 10 minutes. Who knows? But it all kind of worked. I think pushing yourself within reason did help me, at least for my with my fatigue.
Yeah, it's one of those lessons learned. You have to actually, it's like anything, you've got to overdo it to work out where your limit is. And then okay, I actually overdid it for only 5 minutes, and I achieved something, and it didn't bother me and it was okay. But overdoing it for half an hour wiped me out, and
Yeah,
that's not for me to do.
yeah.
Next time I'll just take it easy, and I'll be gentle on myself, and I won't give myself a hard time if I don't succeed. I'll just take it
Oh,
easy.
that's it. That's it. The fact that you would try and you would be brave enough to risk, you know, humiliation or to ask for help, that in itself is something to be congratulated and to celebrate. So you should definitely be very kind to yourself. Um, that saying of half of the battle is turning up. So people who have had strokes is even more so, because we work so much to get to back to work. The fact that I have to do all that stuff. We should kind of take the time to appreciate that, because of all people, we should be able to know just how much we've gone through.
Yeah, one of the lessons I learned was, if I thought about something that was challenging or difficult, like being in a place where there was going to be a lot of people, a party or a family gathering or something, the the simple response was, "No, I don't want to go. I'm not going."
Mm,
And then that, and then that was really easy to fall into that routine and then end up nowhere and then always be isolated. So it became, all right, I'll go. And then when I went, it wasn't about interacting or hanging out or talking rubbish or drinking beers or anything like that. It was just about actually getting there. The task was to get there. And then everything else that came was a bonus. So if it came
yeah.
that I got to stand up by the barbecue and turn meat around like men do, like then that was a bonus. If I didn't have the energy to do that, I sat there with a chair. So
Yeah,
I kind of allowed myself to not talk myself out of something, because previously, if I had gone there, I would have done all these things and participated in this way and in that way. This was now just about turning up, and that's it. And then after that,
absolutely. Oh, I love the way that you reframed that, because it really is about, well, taking one thing at a time. But to me, it's also a missed opportunity. You know, we talked about rehab ultimately being us going out back into the world. The one thing that I really struggled with was not being able to communicate and therefore express myself. Not just I need this or I want that. I want to express my humor. I want to connect with people. That was very hard. So as you said, I could have, as a 22-year-old, you know, it's all about being cool and, which I'm still working on. But the thing is, I realized that if I if I started saying no, I would most likely start have having that habit. So I found a little hack actually, for anyone who is suffering from aphasia, which apparently 1 in 3 people do after having a stroke. So you're not alone. Um, I really enjoyed going to loud bars because people are pretty tipsy anyway, so you're forgiven if you're having to repeat yourself. B, it's very loud, so you're also forgiven because you're talking slower, because you need to enunciate. And I'm telling you, it's almost counterintuitive, but it's a very safe space to do that because no one really cares about, people don't care uh, too much about what you are saying or what you're not saying. Turns out people are fairly self-centered in general. So um, if you're really struggling, you'll be surprised how much people will quickly, step in and say you must be like, oh, they'll try and finish your sentences for you. So yeah, for me, that was a really nice hack, but also kept my confidence up. It allowed me to maintain my friendship circles. Sure, I was like, applying an overlay of rehab, a lens of rehab, which helps. But it's so important to still go get out there and just not be too worried about how other people see you, because ultimately, if they don't see the value or the beauty of the person that is still within you, then maybe they're not the right friend you need anyway.
yeah.
So yeah, strokes. Having a stroke is weirdly great at sifting out good and not so good friends.
There's definitely a lot of good things that came out of my stroke. Hey, that looks like it is an awesome way to end the episode. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your insights into stroke. Um, I think it's going to make a world of difference. These types of episodes do make a difference. People listen to them. They don't feel alone. They don't feel like they're the only one thinking the stuff that we spoke about. And as a result of that, maybe some of the things that we said can trigger their mind and make them think about uh, perhaps how they go about their own stroke recovery and what they could do differently. So thanks for doing that. I really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure, Bill. It's been a pleasure, and I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much.
Discover how to support your recovery after stroke. Go to recoveryafterstroke.com.